The Obsidian Reach wasn't the kind of place you visited if you valued your reputation. Neutral stations rarely were. This particular installation orbited a brown dwarf nobody had bothered naming, spinning slowly in the kind of darkness that made certain transactions feel less documented. Kyle Voss stood in the back of the auction hall, mandibles clicking softly as he processed the crowd. Vryn collective scholars occupied the left quadrant, their compound eyes glittering with academic hunger. Kelhari Empire representatives preened in the center rows, their feathered crests arranged in patterns that screamed hierarchical superiority. Scattered among them were the usual scavengers, Tornathi merchants, Zelwick data brokers, even a few Huronian tunnel dwellers who'd clearly wandered far from home. Everyone pretended this was about historical preservation. Everyone was lying. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, her translator rendering her native Quellan into something approximating enthusiasm. Authenticated remains from Sol 3, commonly designated Earth, one partial skeletal structure, verified human, approximately 400 standard cycles old. Genetic sequencing confirms Homo sapiens sapiens, complete with dental work indicating late Industrial Revolution period. Kyle Voss watched the room's temperature shift. Metaphorically speaking, his species didn't process temperature the way others did, but he recognized hunger when he saw it, and the crowd was starving. Opening bid, 40,000 credits. 50,000. A Kelhari in the third row barely moved her head. 60. A Vryn archivist, predictably. Kyle Voss didn't bid. His collective had sent him to observe, not participate. They already possessed 3 human specimens, all acquired through significantly less public channels. This was theater, and he'd always enjoyed watching other species perform. 100,000. The voice came from somewhere Kyle Voss couldn't immediately locate. Back corner, shadows thick enough to hide a small delegation. The auctioneer's chromatic sacs flushed purple. Pleased. 100,000 from bidder 73. Do I hear 150? The Kelhari again, crest flattening slightly. Annoyance. 200,000. Same voice from the shadows. Calm, almost bored. Now Kyle Voss was interested. He shifted his position, trying to get a better angle. The translator assigned that voice to someone bipedal, oxygen-breathing, probably mammalian. That narrowed it down to about 40 species, none of which typically threw credits around like particularly aggressive vegetation. 250! The Kelhari was standing now, wings partially extended, territorial display. 500,000. The room went quiet in that special way that happens when everyone simultaneously realizes they've miscalculated something fundamental. 500,000 credits, the auctioneer repeated, probably checking her equipment for malfunctions. Current bid from 73. Any advance on 600? The Kelhari's voice had gone crystalline. Dangerous. 1 million. Someone in the Vryn section made a sound like tearing silk. Kyle Voss found himself moving closer to the mysterious bidder, despite every tactical instinct screaming that attention was a predator's first tool. Lot 47 sells for 1 million credits to bidder 73, the auctioneer announced, after a pause that stretched like ligaments before snapping. Pending verification of funds, naturally. Naturally, the shadow voice agreed. The auctioneer's relief was almost audible. Lot 48 follows immediately. Cultural artifacts, also Earth origin. Data storage device, they called them hard drives, recovered from what archival records suggest was an educational facility. Contents encrypted but intact. Opening bid, 20,000 credits. 50,000. Shadow voice again. This time nobody counterbid. The Kelhari had sat down, smoothing her feathers with movements that suggested violent fantasies. The Vryn were conferring in frequency ranges Kyle Voss's equipment couldn't process. Lot 49, musical instrument, string-based, severe fire damage but structurally identifiable. Possibly what humans designated a guitar. Opening bid, 100,000. Would have been 5,000, but 100,000 is certainly acceptable. Sold. Kyle Voss realized what was happening roughly 3 lots before everyone else did. By the time the auction reached Lot 62, a collection of human literature, water-damaged but readable, the mysterious bidder had acquired every single Earth artifact in the catalog. The auctioneer looked like she'd swallowed something that was trying to escape through her respiratory system. This concludes the Obsidian Reach's quarterly xenoarchaeological auction. Successful bidders, please proceed to verification chambers for payment processing and item transfer. The crowd began dispersing with the kind of murmured conversation that indicated everyone would be talking about this for cycles. Kyle Voss stayed put, watching the shadows where bidder 73 should emerge. She did, eventually. Bipedal, yes. Mammalian, certainly. But the specific configuration of features made Kyle Voss's processing centers stumble over themselves like hatchlings encountering their first puzzle box. Human. The word materialized in his consciousness with the impact of a small orbital strike. She was human. Problem. She directed the question at Kyle Voss specifically, apparently unconcerned that she was addressing a species that could dismember her in approximately 4 seconds. Her clothing was nondescript, functional grays and blacks that could have belonged to any number of civilizations. Her face held an expression Kyle Voss's translation software labeled amused contempt. "You're extinct," Kyle Voss said, which wasn't his most diplomatic opening, but seemed relevant under the circumstances. Clearly. She gestured at herself. Extremely extinct. So deceased, in fact, that I just spent 7 million credits on my own people's garage sale. A Kelhari navigator who'd been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. Earth was quarantined 300 cycles ago. The ecological collapse was very collapsy, very ecological. Gold star for paying attention. The human's smile didn't reach her eyes, which Kyle Voss found somehow more threatening than if it had. Tell me something, though. All of you. Question. She waited, letting the silence build until it had its own weight. If my species is so comprehensively dead, so thoroughly extinct, so absolutely finished. She paused, looking around the auction hall where 24 species were now openly staring. Why are your governments still filing intelligence reports about us? Why do your military installations still maintain Earth-specific threat protocols? Why does every single one of you look like you've seen a ghost when I walk into a room? Nobody answered. Kyle Voss suspected nobody could. The human walked toward the exit, then stopped. Turned back. Oh, and I'm not actually buying any of this. Consider it a donation. Take your specimens, your hard drives, your burnt guitars, put them in museums, charge admission, whatever helps you sleep in your designated rest cycles. Then why, the Kelhari started. Why bid? The human's expression shifted into something that translation software had no business trying to categorize. I wanted to see what you'd pay. Wanted to know exactly how much my people's corpses are worth to the galaxy that watched us die. She was gone before anyone formulated a response, leaving behind a room full of species that had spent 3 centuries convinced they knew everything about humanity. Kyle Voss clicked his mandibles together slowly, processing. His collective would want a full report. They'd want analysis, threat assessment, cultural interpretation. What they'd get was a question he couldn't answer. If humans were dead, why did it feel like they'd been waiting for this moment the entire time? The auctioneer was frantically checking her records, probably trying to determine if bidder 73's credits were even real. Kyle Voss suspected they were. Suspected the human had more where those came from. Suspected that somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity was laughing at every species that had ever underestimated extinction's capacity for patience. He left the Obsidian Reach with more questions than he'd arrived with. In his experience, that was usually how humans preferred it. The Vryn Collective's central archive existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, which made filing reports a bureaucratic nightmare, but ensured nothing ever truly disappeared. Kyle Voss submitted his auction observations through the standard channels, flagged them as priority amber, and assumed that would be the end of his involvement. He was wrong approximately 16 hours later when the summons arrived. The archive chamber they'd assigned smelled like ozone and old decisions. Kyle Voss entered to find Director Chesnal already reviewing holographic projections, dozens of them, layered like archaeological strata. "You encountered a living human," Chesnal said without preamble. Her antennae were doing that thing they did when she was recalculating probability matrices on the fly. "Allegedly. Don't be cute. Your sensory logs confirmed genetic markers." She gestured, and the projections rearranged themselves. "We've been cross-referencing your report with historical data. The timeline doesn't reconcile." Kyle Voss moved closer. The projections showed Earth from orbit, except there were multiple Earths, or rather, the same planet across different temporal stamps. He recognized the catastrophic sequence: atmospheric degradation, oceanic acidification, continental-scale fires. Official galactic record states Earth underwent terminal ecological failure in cycle 4782. Chesnal continued. "The humans were too fractious to cooperate, too primitive to save themselves. 3 different coalitions offered intervention. All were declined. And then the planet died. I know the history." "Do you?" Chesnal isolated one projection, a Kelhari surveillance feed dated 6 months before the collapse. "This is Ambassador Thekvar addressing the Empire's Strategic Council. Watch." The hologram showed a cramped chamber, feathers glinting under harsh lighting. Thekvar's crest was fully extended, which in Kelhari body language translated to absolute conviction. "Human governments have rejected our relief frameworks," the ambassador was saying, "but their populations are fracturing. Mass protests in 70% of their nation-states. We've identified 12 regional leaders who would welcome Kelhari administration if it meant survival for their people." Another voice, off-screen, "You're proposing invasion. I'm proposing salvation with favorable trade agreements. Earth has resources we need. Rare metals, biological diversity, water, so much water. If we position our fleet as liberators rather than conquerors..." Chesnal froze the projection. The Kelhari weren't alone. "We've uncovered similar discussions from the Tornathi Syndicate and the Zelwick Confederacy. All planned interventions, all scheduled within the same 3-month window." Kyle Voss felt his processing centers struggling. 3 separate invasion forces, all pretending to be rescue missions. Each unaware of the other's intentions. The coordination was almost impressive in its complete absence. Chesnal brought up another file, this one stamped with encryption markers from the disbanded Zelwick intelligence apparatus. This is where it gets interesting. The document was a communication intercept, fragmented but readable. Source: Zelwick Deep Space Monitoring Station. Target: unknown. Transmission originating from Earth's lunar satellite. Fragment 1. Confirmed. Kelhari fleet deployment matches Projection 7. Tornathi merchant vessels reconfigured for troop transport, consistent with Scenario 12. Fragment 2. Recommend acceleration of severance protocol. Timeline moved to 18 days. Fragment 3. All surface governments briefed. Agreement unanimous. Better to burn than to be saved. They knew, Kyle Voss said quietly. Humans knew everyone was coming. They'd been monitoring the entire galaxy's communications for decades. Chesnal pulled up more files, a cascade of evidence. Human signal intelligence was far more sophisticated than anyone realized. They cracked Kelhari encryption in 4779, Tornathi commercial codes in 4780, even our own preliminary archives by 4781. They watched every species that contacted them, analyzed every diplomatic overture, and concluded, correctly, that benevolence was a mask worn over hunger. The next projection made Kael'Voss's mandibles lock completely. It was a human document, crude by galactic standards but devastating in its clarity. The heading read, Severance Protocol, Final Authorization. Chesnal highlighted specific passages. They had a plan. Not for survival, for disappearance. Instructions for coordinated infrastructure collapse, electromagnetic signature elimination, deliberate environmental acceleration to create the appearance of runaway catastrophe. They destroyed their own planet. They made it look destroyed. Strategic burns, atmospheric seeding with pollutants, fabricated refugee transmissions. They even crashed their own satellites to create debris patterns consistent with societal breakdown. Chesnal's voice carried something Kyle Voss rarely heard from her. Respect. Every sensor reading we took, every surveillance pass, all showed exactly what we expected to see. A species tearing itself apart. Kyle Voss examined the timeline. The 3 invasion forces. Arrived to a dead world. Radiation levels toxic, infrastructure in ruins, no life signs above bacterial. They probed the rubble for 6 months, found nothing worth claiming, and left. Chesnal paused. But here's the question that should terrify you. Where did the humans go? More projections materialized. These ones marked unconfirmed intelligence. Sightings, rumors, ghost stories that had accumulated across 3 centuries. A Tornathi mining operation reporting entire equipment shipments vanishing without explanation. Kelhari border stations detecting gravitational anomalies that disappeared before investigation. Vryn deep space probes going silent in sectors where nothing should exist. For 300 cycles, we've dismissed these as equipment failures, statistical noise, cosmic phenomena. Chesnal's antennae were vibrating now. Stress response. What if they weren't? A new file opened, this one recent. A Huronian merchant's testimony, recorded 4 months prior. The ship was there, then it wasn't. No jump signature, no engine burn, just absence. But I swear I saw markings, symbols I'd only seen in historical databases about Earth. Another testimony from a Zelwick cargo hauler. The scanner showed empty space. My co-pilot saw empty space. I looked out the observation port, and there was something there, smooth, dark, watching us. When I looked away and back, nothing. My co-pilot thinks I'm losing coherence. Maybe I am. Chesnal collapsed the projections except for one, a star map showing hundreds of unexplained incidents, scattered across civilized space like seeds waiting to germinate. Reconnaissance, Kyle Voss said. They've been studying us the entire time. Learning our patrol routes, our communication networks, our economic dependencies, our political fractures. Chesnal met his gaze with all 14 of her visual receptors. They spent 3 centuries doing what they do best, adapting while everyone assumed they were gone. And now. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Kyle Voss looked at the scattered reports, the ghost sightings, the impossible disappearances. Humanity hadn't died. They'd transformed into something the galaxy had no framework for understanding. A species that had weaponized their own extinction. What does the collective want me to do? He asked. The same thing every government in civilized space is doing right now. Chesnal's voice was flat. Panic quietly and hope we figure out what humans want before they decide to show us. Kyle Voss left the archive with a new understanding. The galaxy hadn't watched a species die. They'd witnessed a magic trick, and they'd been congratulating themselves on seeing through it for 300 years. The humans had been counting on that. Somewhere in the dark between stars, humanity was still counting. The Kelhari Empire maintained 17 border stations along the perimeter veil, each one a testament to military efficiency and the kind of paranoia that kept civilizations alive. Station Tekshar was the smallest, which meant it only housed 400 personnel and enough firepower to atomize a small moon. Commander Riel Koth reviewed the morning reports with her third coffee substitute, a vile Tornathi brew that tasted like regret but kept her alert during double shifts. The reports were boring, perfectly, blissfully boring. Then sensor operator Ven Lees stopped preening mid-feather. "Commander, long-range array is showing something." Rielkoth's crest flattened. In her experience, something was never good news. "Clarify." Gravitational displacement consistent with a vessel. Mass signature suggests cruiser class or larger. Ven Lees's talons danced across the interface. But there's no engine signature. No heat bloom. No electromagnetic output whatsoever. "Sensor malfunction." "Negative. I'm running triple redundancy. The mass is there, Commander. It's just quiet." Rielkoth crossed to the sensor station. Her training, warring with instinct. Ships didn't move without engines. Physics didn't allow for it, even with exotic propulsion systems. Distance? 400,000 kilometers and holding. It appeared 6 minutes ago. Just appeared. Visual confirmation? The main display shifted to telescope feed. Empty space greeted them, stars scattered like indifferent witnesses. Magnify grid 773. The image expanded. Still nothing. Except there was something. A darkness that wasn't quite darkness. A void that had texture where it shouldn't. Rielkoth had spent 20 years in border security. She knew the difference between empty space and occupied space, pretending to be empty. Broadcast standard hail, all frequencies. Ven Lees complied. The message propagated outward. Identification request, peaceful intentions, the usual diplomatic dance that preceded either conversation or violence. Silence answered, the kind that had weight. Try again. Include trade common, military bands, even those frequencies the Huronian tunnel dwellers use. Nothing. The void watched them watching it. Weapon status? Rielkoth asked quietly. All batteries charged and ready, Commander. Targeting solution locked, despite the sensor irregularities. Hold fire. Rielkoth's mind raced through protocols. Unknown vessel, non-responsive, capable of technology that violated understood physics. This was either first contact with something revolutionary or the prelude to something catastrophic. Deploy reconnaissance drone. Passive sensors only. I want to know what we're looking at. The drone launched, a small spark of Kelhari engineering crossing the gap. Its telemetry fed directly to the command center, showing approach vectors and distance markers counting down. At 50,000 kilometers, the readings went strange. Not wrong, strange. The drone's sensors detected atmospheric composition, hull plating, structural integrity, all the markers of a functioning spacecraft. But visually, the telescope still showed nothing. It's there, Ven Lees whispered. The drone confirms solid matter, but light just slides around it somehow. At 10,000 kilometers, the drone's camera finally caught something. A reflection, brief as a thought. Smooth surfaces, angular design, construction materials that looked organic and synthetic simultaneously. At 1,000 kilometers, the void shifted. The drone disappeared. No explosion, no debris field, no energy discharge. One moment it existed. The next, it didn't. Every alarm in Station Tekshar screamed warning. "Contact lost," Venlisa's voice cracked. "Drone telemetry ceased instantly. No malfunction warning, no—" The void was moving, not toward them, perpendicular to their position, sliding through space with the ease of something that had rewritten fundamental laws and forgotten to mention it to the universe. It accelerated without thrust, turned without maneuvering jets, existed without apparently caring about the conventions that governed everyone else. Then it was gone. Sensors showed empty space. Visual confirmation showed empty space. Even the gravitational displacement vanished, as if physics had corrected an embarrassing error. Real Koth stood frozen for 3 heartbeats. "Log everything. Encrypt it with Command Cipher Alpha. Send it directly to Strategic Intelligence with Priority Omega classification. Commander, that classification is reserved for existential threats." Yes. Real Koth's feathers were rigid. "Log the report as contact with unknown entity displaying impossible technological capabilities. Note that it observed us, catalogued our responses, and departed when it had learned what it wanted." She didn't add what she was thinking. That they'd just been studied like specimens in a laboratory, and whatever had been doing the studying hadn't bothered introducing itself because introduction implied equality. The reports multiplied across the following weeks like a virus designed by a particularly sadistic mathematician. Tornathi Syndicate lost contact with a supply convoy. Ships found later, crews unharmed but confused, cargo manifests accessed and copied with no physical evidence of boarding. Zelwick listening posts detected transmission patterns that matched no known language, stopped abruptly when observation was noticed. A Vryn exploration vessel encountered a structure in deep space. Crystalline, massive, broadcasting nothing. When they returned with a larger fleet, the structure was gone. Spatial analysis showed it had never been there, despite recorded footage proving otherwise. Huronian mining colonies reported equipment operating on its own, performing maintenance with efficiency that exceeded manufacturer specifications, then returning to normal function as if nothing had occurred. Every incident shared characteristics: non-hostile contact, technological impossibility, and the unmistakable sense of being catalogued by something that already knew your answers before asking questions. The Galactic Commerce Exchange crashed for 40 minutes when someone leaked a memo suggesting humanity might be responsible. Markets recovered only after 5 governments simultaneously denied the possibility, which convinced absolutely nobody because governments denied things the way fish swam. Emergency sessions convened. Intelligence agencies shared data with rivals they'd been spying on for centuries. Military commands compared notes on phenomena they'd individually dismissed as equipment failure or crew hallucination. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was mapping galactic civilization with the thoroughness of an artist sketching prey. The summit convened on neutral ground Sigma, a station so diplomatically neutered it made the Obsidian Reach look positively opinionated. Representatives from 47 species crowded into chambers designed for half that number, everyone pretending they weren't terrified. Kylvos attended as Vryn, collective observer, which meant he stood in the back and tried not to click his mandibles disapprovingly. The Kelhari had sent a delegation headed by Rael Koth herself, promoted 3 times since her encounter. Tornathi, Zelwick, Huronian, everyone who'd experienced the phenomena sent their finest diplomats and most decorated military minds. The human walked in like she owned the station's oxygen supply. Same woman from the auction. Same expression that suggested she found the entire galaxy faintly ridiculous. She took a seat marked Observer Unaffiliated without asking permission. "You," Realkoth's crest shot upward. You're human. Observant. Your species must have excellent vision. The woman settled into her chair with the comfort of someone who'd already won negotiations that hadn't started yet. I'm here informally. Consider me interested in how this conversation develops. This is a closed session, a Tornathi bureaucrat sputtered. Security protocols. We're bypassed by whoever let me dock. But please, continue. I'm fascinated to hear how you plan to address the ghost ship problem. She smiled. That's what you're calling them, right? Ghost ships? The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Director Shesnal, attending via holographic projection, spoke carefully. If humanity is responsible for these incursions. Incursions? The woman laughed, short and sharp. We haven't fired a single shot, haven't stolen anything, haven't even said hello. We've just been present, observing, learning. You know, the exact thing you all did to Earth for 200 years before deciding we were too inconvenient to save. That's not, Realkoth started. Accurate? Really? The woman leaned forward. Commander, your empire filed 873 intelligence reports on human civilization between first contact and our supposed extinction. Want to guess how many offered genuine assistance without strategic conditions attached? Silence. I'll save you the math. 0. The woman's voice carried across the chamber like a blade, finding gaps in armor. 3 centuries ago, you watched us face ecological collapse. 3 different armadas prepared to rescue us, each one planning to own whatever pieces remained. You thought we didn't notice. You thought we were too busy dying. She stood, and every species in the room tracked the movement like prey watching a predator stretch. But here's the part that should keep you awake during your rest cycles. We had 300 years. 300 years while you congratulated yourselves on witnessing extinction. 300 years of silence you mistook for absence. Her smile could have cut steel. Tell me something. If you had 3 centuries to prepare while your enemies thought you were dead, what would you do with that time? Nobody answered, because everyone was imagining exactly that scenario and discovering they didn't like the results. You spent 3 centuries celebrating our death, the woman continued. Did none of you wonder what we were doing with all that time? She walked toward the exit, paused at the threshold. Enjoy your summit. Debate your protocols. File your reports. We'll be watching. We've gotten quite good at it. The door sealed behind her, leaving 47 species to contemplate a truth that rewrote 300 years of assumed history. Humanity hadn't been hiding. They'd been studying. The summit dissolved into chaos approximately 4 minutes after the human left. Chaos was too generous a term, actually. It was more like watching a carefully constructed tower of political facades collapse into its foundation of mutual paranoia. Kyle Voss observed the spectacle with something approaching anthropological detachment. The Kelhari wanted immediate military escalation. The Tornathi suggested economic sanctions, which was hilarious considering nobody knew where humanity kept its economy. The Zelwick proposed dialogue, then immediately contradicted themselves by recommending weapons development. Smaller delegations mostly looked ill. Director Shesnell's hologram flickered with what Kyle Voss recognized as bandwidth strain. She was running approximately 70 simultaneous conversations through different channels while maintaining her projection here. The collective was hedging every possible outcome, standard procedure, when faced with variables that refused to behave like variables should. 3 hours into recursive arguments that solved nothing, the chamber's communication system activated without anyone requesting access. The human woman's face filled every display. "Apologies for the interruption," she said, tone suggesting she was about as apologetic as a supernova. "But watching you argue in circles was getting tedious. and I have a limited tolerance for tedium. Rielkoth's feathers bristled. This is a secured channel. Yes, quite secured. We've been monitoring it since before you arrived. Your encryption is adorable, by the way. Very retro. The woman's image shifted, replaced by scrolling data. Every communication sent from the summit in the past 6 hours, decoded and categorized. But let's skip the part where you bluster about sovereignty and jump to the part where we discuss terms. Terms for what? Chesnal asked, her voice carrying calculated neutrality. For humanity's reintegration into galactic civilization. The woman's face returned to the screens. We're ready to come back. Officially, with full participation in trade networks, diplomatic channels, cultural exchange, everything you'd expect from a species that isn't extinct. The room went silent in a way that suggested everyone was simultaneously calculating angles. What's the cost? A Huronian delegate, practical to the point of bluntness. Cost implies transaction. Think of this as prerequisite. The woman's expression remained pleasant, which somehow made her next words more threatening. We require one condition: complete transparency in all interspecies diplomatic relations. Transparency, Rielkoth repeated carefully. We've developed certain technologies during our absence. Tools that make deception functionally impossible in negotiation settings. The display shifted again, showing schematics that made Kael Voss's processing centers stumble over implications. Bioscanners that read neurological intent across species barriers, linguistic analysis algorithms that detect manipulation patterns in communication, behavioral prediction models that identify hidden agendas with 97% accuracy. Chesnal's hologram pixelated briefly, surprise causing bandwidth fluctuation. You want to deploy lie detectors in diplomatic chambers. We want to deploy honesty. Slight difference. The woman gestured, and the schematics expanded. Imagine treaty negotiations where nobody can promise assistance while planning invasion, trade agreements where actual terms match stated terms, alliance frameworks built on verifiable mutual interest rather than strategic backstabbing dressed as friendship. The Tornathi bureaucrat struggled for words. That's not how galactic politics functions. Correct. It's how human politics will function going forward. Whether you choose to participate is entirely your decision. The woman leaned back, perfectly comfortable with the silence that followed. We're offering partnership. Real partnership. The kind where everyone knows exactly where they stand because pretending has been removed as an option. Kael Voss watched delegations processing this. Every species present maintained networks of secret alliances, covert operations, hidden agendas. The Kelhari had 3 separate military initiatives they hadn't disclosed to anyone. The Tornathi ran intelligence operations against allies and enemies indiscriminately. His own collective maintained surveillance protocols that would spark incidents if revealed. Galactic civilization was built on layers of productive dishonesty, everyone spying on everyone while shaking appendages and signing agreements. Humanity was proposing to remove every single layer. This is coercion, Rielkoth said flatly. Accept transparency or face isolation. Isolation? No. The woman smiled. You can reject our offer entirely. Continue your current civilization model. Secret pacts, hidden fleets, espionage masquerading as diplomacy. We won't stop you. Then what's the leverage? Leverage assumes we need something from you. We don't. The woman's voice carried absolute certainty. We've spent 3 centuries becoming self-sufficient. Our technology development curve made your advancement look stationary. We don't need your trade routes, your resources, your protection, or your approval. She paused, letting that sink in like slow-acting poison. What we're offering is the opportunity to build something better. A civilization where trust isn't naive. It's verified. Where cooperation happens because it benefits everyone, not because someone's hiding exploitation behind diplomatic language. The woman's expression softened microscopically. We're offering you the chance to stop being afraid of each other. Naive idealism, a Zelwick delegate muttered. Is it? Ask yourselves, why do you maintain defensive fleets against allies? Why encrypt communications with trading partners? Why does every diplomatic success require intelligence agencies to confirm nobody's cheating? The woman counted on her fingers. You've built an entire civilization on the assumption that everyone's lying. We're just suggesting you acknowledge it and choose differently. Chesnal spoke carefully. And if we refuse, then nothing changes for you. You continue as before, watching your backs, checking your scanners, wondering who's planning what behind closed sessions. The woman shrugged. We return to our self-sufficient existence beyond your borders. Visit occasionally, trade when it suits us, observe your civilization the way you observed ours. The implications landed like ordnance. Humanity didn't need galactic civilization. Galactic civilization might need humanity, or at least couldn't afford to have a technologically superior species existing independently, outside established power structures, watching. You're forcing a binary choice, Realkoth said. Join your transparency framework or accept permanent uncertainty about human intentions. Not forcing, offering. The woman's smile returned, sharp enough to draw blood. But yes, those are your options. Trust and verification, or suspicion and isolation. Choose whichever makes you more comfortable. Kael Voss understood then. This wasn't negotiation. It was diagnosis. Humanity was revealing what galactic civilization actually was, a complex web of mutual distrust held together by carefully maintained deceptions. They weren't threatening to tear it down. They were asking if anyone wanted to build something honest. And every species in the chamber was discovering that honesty terrified them more than any weapon. We'll need time, Chesnal said. To consider, to consult. Of course. Take all the time you need. The woman stood, preparing to disconnect. We've waited 300 years. We're patient. One question, Kael Voss heard himself say. Every visual sensor in the room turned toward him. He ignored them, focusing on the screen. Why offer this at all? If you're truly self-sufficient, why engage with us? The woman regarded him with something that might have been respect. Because isolation isn't victory. It's just survival. We didn't spend 3 centuries rebuilding to hide forever. We want to participate in something larger than ourselves. We want trade, cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, all the benefits of civilization. She paused. We just refuse to do it while pretending everyone's honest when nobody is. Her image began to fade. Final thought for your deliberations. You've spent the past month calling us ghost ships, phantom vessels, impossible anomalies. Spent decades before that calling us a dying species. You're excellent at naming things you don't understand. The smile turned into something else. Not quite pity, not quite triumph. But here's the designation you should consider. We're the species that learned honesty from being surrounded by liars. The species that chose trust only after verifying every species that claimed friendship was planning conquest. The screens went dark. The chamber erupted into debate that would last for weeks. Governments would convene emergency sessions. Intelligence agencies would analyze every word for hidden meaning. Irony lost on absolutely nobody. Kael Voss sat quietly, mandibles clicking a rhythm that matched his thoughts. Humanity had returned with a gift nobody wanted, a mirror showing exactly what galactic civilization had become. They weren't offering salvation or threatening destruction. They were asking a question that had no comfortable answer. The galaxy had called them dying. Now they were asking, who's really dying here? The species that rebuilt itself on foundations of verified trust? Or the civilization that couldn't imagine diplomacy without deception? Kyle Voss suspected the answer would take longer than 3 centuries to determine. Outside the station, in the darkness where sensors occasionally detected things they couldn't quite explain, humanity waited. Patient. Prepared. Watching to see if the galaxy would choose honesty or continue performing the elaborate theater of mutual betrayal it called civilization. Either way, they'd already won. They'd asked the question nobody else dared to. What if we stopped lying to each other? And every species was discovering they had no idea how to answer.